The following episode was recorded at Banff Session 2026, which is celebrating 70 years of architects and interior designers coming together to share ideas, culture, strategy, and this year's theme was origin stories. In this episode, I'm joined by Claire Weisz. She originally grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and she is now based out of New York, where she co-founded the architecture and design studio WXY. She holds an undergraduate professional degree with honors from the University of Toronto and a Master of Architecture from Yale. She is a Fellow of the American Institute of Architects, an Honorary Fellow of the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada, and the recipient of the AIA New York Medal of Honor. I'm your host, Kelso Brennan, and I'm genuinely curious about strategy, business, architecture, design, and talking with the people behind big, bold ideas. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. On our initial discovery phone call, I learned that you spent time in Edmonton. Did you grow up in Edmonton?
Truth be known, I grew up in Edmonton from maybe a year old until I was 16.
Wow. Okay. And then you did go to Toronto for school initially?
I did. University of Toronto.
Yeah.
Right from Ross Shepherd High School.
Oh, Roshep. I know where Roshep is.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's a small world. And our first call, you were on the New York subway, and I thought, I didn't want to take too much of your time and save it, obviously, for here on the podcast. But you've got an incredible career. And I think from my side of things, I was fortunate to not know very much about all of the guests that I've had on here. So it's allowed me to do as much independent research as I'd like to of what's on the internet. But more importantly, the people that are at the conference, talking to them. And you've got quite a reputation in the industry. So coming from Toronto, finishing university, and then your master's at Yale, Masters of Architecture.
It was. I did what they call a post-professional degree. So you're already licensed as an architect, you have a degree, but you want to go back usually to teach.
Okay.
And now I still want to know what kind of reputation I have. Hopefully by the end of this talk, I'll hear.
Okay.
Because I regard myself as completely a secret. I get to operate very mysteriously.
Well, and that's an interesting part too, but you've had some pretty great exposure. One of the videos that I watched was from Wired from about 4 years ago, where you talk about streetscapes and redesigning some of the street spaces in New York. And I found that quite fascinating. There's a book that I love called The Address Book. It's about what addresses have to do with wealth, race, and power. But throughout the book, I'm in the wayfinding industry, and I found it so interesting to talk about how urban planning and streets are laid out. And it talks a little bit about Quaker influence, like Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, where you get Quaker influence on streets and rows and systems, first street, second street, and getting away from naming conventions of people or opulence from that standpoint, and then kind of making things a little bit more equal for everybody. But then you get into places like London and New York, and you get some really crazy streets that I don't know, how urban planning was done at the time, but it creates for very unique properties on very challenging, complex, street corners and the buildings themselves that are built on those properties. So you've had a very big influence on some major prominent locations in New York. Tell me about how you even got into that in the first place.
Well, I love history. So I'm glad that you kind of talked about the history of how places get made. Yeah. And I also think that maybe way back when in earlier life, I must be related to like detectives, because I also love mysteries. And so, maybe I could have followed my father's footsteps and become an internist, because they have to figure out why people are having certain symptoms, what's actually wrong.
Oh.
But in a lot of ways, I feel that I was attracted to architecture because I looked at it and like, well, why does that building look like that way? Why is that street named that? So even I remember this, even in high school at Edmonton, I had a friend who was a kind of really interested in cities. He turned out he went into planning later, and we used to kind of conduct large scale. Um, we'd hide things, and then we'd leave clues, and we'd try and convince people to go out into Edmonton and go find things based on the clues. Like we really, in high school, you feel like you can do anything, and we're like, hey, we're going to create scavenger hunts with like hints based on historical facts. I realized later that that was not a normal thing to do.
Well, it's interesting too to where people would find those facts. So how did you come up with some of those? Do you remember any specific ones?
Well, I remember things like, a fact about the high level bridge,
Oh yeah, of
and then but not leaving it at the high level bridge.
course, somewhere
Like
else leads into the next plot.
yes, exactly.
Very
So
interesting.
eventually you realize all the clues were going to lead you to the high level
Yeah.
bridge. But that was just deep in memories, and mostly I think it's very hard to choose what you end up doing. And I think in a lot of ways it's a series of accidents.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's okay. And maybe that's like the message, period,
Yeah.
is that architecture is such a great way to set up situations. And the reason everyone's career is different is that everyone reacts to situations differently.
Right. Yes. Actually, I had Ron Wickman in here. He's very well known for accessibility design, and his father was paralyzed from a workplace accident, and it influenced his architecture. And so there's happy, accidents, and then there's those terrible tragedies as well that will influence that along the way. Is there something that would have been one or two defining moments that start to lead you down a path that gets you, say, even to New York, or to start your own firm in or your own practice in the first place? Like, anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I realized later there was a couple of super influential people in my life that in Edmonton that I only had like short interactions with. And one of them was David Lieberman because, we both grew up Jewish in Edmonton. He had an amazing career. He built a bunch of buildings in Edmonton. At the time, I didn't know what architecture was, but when I was at University of Toronto and I started thinking, I got to do something where I can draw all the time,
Oh yeah.
I heard that he was an architect and I asked him to meet with me. It was called Lieberman Wilkins, I think, the practice, Wilkins Lieberman. And he was just a fun conversation, and he made me feel like, okay, architecture, you will have lots of interesting conversations in your life.
Oh,
I like that.
yeah.
So there was one, and the other one was meeting Patricia Patkow. That was maybe I was in my first year of architecture because I had gotten in, and I'd come back to, or maybe it was right before, but I had a summer job, I think at a print press in Edmonton. And someone who I had met knew her. She was working and her husband for the Edmonton School Board at the time.
Okay.
And just meeting her and seeing someone who kind of was doing good for the world, but loved, kind of was just passionate about it. I thought, that's what's been missing. I haven't been exposed enough to people who are passionate about what they're doing. So I figured that if meeting people in architecture that were just so excited about it, I thought, I just want to be doing something I'm truly excited
Do
about.
you think that or do you ever put any thought to that you're now that person, that you're being an influence on somebody else's life, that they become that spark of passion, or they carry forward that same feeling that you had with those people?
Well, I think that get just as excited about meeting people who are doing different things. And I hope I can convey some of what got conveyed to me for sure. But I also think that new tools, new opportunities, the nice thing about doing design is that like I always call us magpies, like we pick up stuff. So when I get to talk to people, I'm like, and it not meant in a bad way. I'm really interested in what they're thinking about, what they're looking at, because then I want to research it. And there might be, not that I would use it the same way as they use it, but I always feel like I'm going to find something
Yeah.
that will become
Along the
special
way.
along the way. Kind of like a magpie finds that glittery thing
Yeah.
and takes it back.
And they're very smart birds as
They're
well.
really smart.
Yeah. But yeah, picking up those things. And also, I kind of think of like building a nest out of things that were peculiar that they found along the way
Yeah.
as well.
So I don't think of it as stealing. I think of it as borrowing, and then hopefully other people feel like they can borrow from you. And that's a kind of different strategy than feeling like every time the pressure is on one to be original.
Well, there's a lot of respect in architecture and interior design. I found that everybody has a very respectful approach and appeal to moving from one firm to another, for instance, or starting their own. And there's a lot of encouragement and support, which is hard to do amongst professional organizations when you have a lot of people involved and there's projects, there's money, there's business, of course, but there's also still just a high level of respect for everybody as they're moving through their careers and, the right people for the right fit and the right time. But you started your own firm in 1998, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, around then. Maybe a little bit earlier.
Okay. And so,
But it became official in 1990.
so you were starting it initially, but okay, now
Yeah.
we've got to name it. And obviously, your business partner as well, and X or WXY. I have one question about that because you spent a lot of time in Canada and now you're in New York. Finish the sentence for me. WXY and
Z.
Okay, so that's the American side of and Z, of course, in
Yes,
Canada.
I know. I when I'm here, I have to go WEISZ, and I have to look at myself because I do say Z now.
Yeah, understood. Well,
But apparently there are other words that sound Canadian to people. I still get caught.
Oh, do you?
About
Yeah.
out and about,
Out and about, yeah.
out and about. But I slip.
Well, still, truly Canadian at heart, regardless. And you bring the kindness, I hope, everywhere you go, which you've been so kind in our first interactions. And of course, when you stopped by when we were setting up the booth, I found you to be such a genuine and caring person. And you also asked me a lot of questions about myself, which I very much appreciated, which was very nice. Of course, I've got so many for you. And I guess one of the questions I have is around your mentorship. Any major mentors or influences along your way throughout your career as you were earning your stripes?
Well, I think I'm really lucky because people in many, many ways kind of felt like they wanted help. And so that I try and do the same. I just assume, maybe this is the kind of Canadian nice thing. I just assume people might want my help. So I think the paying forward part of that is people always assumed that I would welcome help. And I always assume people are going to that it's a thing. So a long time ago, I worked for, he was my thesis professor, Peter Hamilton. He's long gone, but he was a real architect's architect. And I saw how carefully he made drawings and how every window, but he didn't get lost in the details. He was always stepping back and wanting the full effect of how it would be on the street. And so I learned a lot from watching him.
Interesting. I noticed when I watched the Wired video when you were going over, is it Cooper Street or Cooper Avenue?
Cooper Square.
Cooper Square, right. Sorry, I apologize. But you've got the sort of onion skin paper, the tracing paper, and you're walking people through it. Do you still use a lot of tactile and writing and drawing in your day-to-day work?
Absolutely. And, I'll explain the name a little bit. So Claire Weisz Architect, which is sort of the origin company, then Mark Yos, who I also happen to be married with, graduated a year after me at Yale. We both were working. But I really wanted to start a practice when we had our first daughter because I just felt like too hard otherwise. And so I got enough work, and Mark joined in the practice. He was still at pay partnership then. And so we were W plus Y. And then as Lang Pugh, amazing person I went to school with, and Adam Lubinsky, who trained as both an architect and a planner, as they joined, we were like, we have to rotate the plus.
Oh.
This is 8 times.
Oh,
And so it became,
that's
then
so
people
good.
didn't say W times Y, they went WXY.
Yeah.
And then people go NZ or
Of
NZ.
course, yeah.
So at this point, I've been totally pushed out of the office because every time people ask about a firm, it's X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z because it's an expression. So there are no W's anymore.
Well,
it's just X, Y, and Z.
You're the first. The W comes before everybody else in that case. And I love the multiplication aspect of that. It's really sort of a reference from the mathematics that we are far more than 1 + 1. It is, the sum of that is just so great.
So like to take the mathematics back to mentoring. So I think of so many people in my life, my friend Jessica Helfand, who we were both doing thesis at the same time, and she was doing it on the square and I was doing it on symmetry. And so people of all ages, whether they're your good friends, whether they're someone you never thought you could talk to, whether they're someone you just meet on a bench out here, at the Banff Sessions. Already I've met some amazing people. I feel like mentoring is a word, but really the word is caring about what other people are doing and thinking. That turns into sometimes mentoring, sometimes helping, sometimes collaborating.
Right.
So I feel like it's an activist thing.
Okay. And when I think about mentoring too, I think about the role reversal too. There's always tends to be a mentor has gained all experience and then is always cascading downwards. But there's actually quite a bit of the role reversal as well, where you're learning a lot from new people that are coming in, and then they might be experts on something that's a bit more maybe cutting edge or trending. And so I feel like at least I'm at this middle point at what society says is your career. I'm in my 40s. And so, you kind of gain some experience in your 20s or after you're, out of school and university. And then we're supposedly supposed to stop work at 65-ish, whatever the math is. Of course, many people go well beyond, many people go well before that. I'm smack in the middle where I know enough that I don't know anything. And I'm learning from the people, that are coming fresh out of school. And I'm learning from some great mentors that are retired, that have learned some great lessons along the way. Some hard, some difficult ones, some maybe easy that were just right in front of you, but you're missing. And so I wonder, what do you see yourself doing in 10 years from now? This episode is supported by High Signs. I know not everybody likes commercials, but I do want to make a note that as the managing director of High Signs, we're here to help support architects and interior designers. I've been fortunate to work on projects in Reykjavik, Iceland, Hawaii, Montana, Banff, Jasper, Calgary, Edmonton, and beyond. We like to focus on placemaking, wayfinding, and architectural signage. Our design team help with sign planning, content schedules, mapping, engineering, fabrication, and installation. Whether it's a public art installation or campus wayfinding, we're here to help. High Signs. Let's build something great together.
Well, before I answer that,
Okay.
I'm going to talk about you a little bit.
All right.
So I think it's so interesting that you're talking about you're in the middle of your career. But when I first spoke to you, explained that you, in fact, have a career where you bought businesses.
Yes.
And those businesses, in a lot of ways, you mentored and figured out, but those businesses were tied to people.
Yeah.
And you, in a way, it's kind of like you're a matchmaker. But you were responsible for them succeeding. So that's kind of such an interesting career trajectory.
I appreciate that. And I think, too, that every business that we've acquired, we cared deeply about the reputation for the person that built it before us, and then tried to augment it in a way that would give it longevity past even us, that would persist. So my wife and I have been entrepreneurs, and we've built and sold some businesses from the ground up, which is infinitely more difficult than starting with a client list and a reputation and building upon somebody else's shoulders. And um, and I feel like the people that we did acquire their businesses, that they're quite proud of the business. And so sometimes, I would say maybe in one case, there was some animosity about how well it did after. And sort of like, you know, um, I don't know if it's called jealousy to some degree, but we've always kept the original founders in mind. That I think about it like jewelry to some degree, where if you're truly a great, a person who's a craftsman making jewelry, that's only learned through experience, and you have this relationship where you're passing it down to the person before you, and there's no real prescribed body of knowledge that someone can learn from. And so we kind of have to come in as detectives, as you said, and figure out what was making this business successful, and then how do we multiply that one thing that's been so good for them, and then sort of strip away the other things that are taking up that time. And I've enjoyed it, and I feel like you've watched the movie Titanic, of course, with
Repeatedly.
repeatedly. Okay, perfect. Well, there's a scene where there's the first class cabin, and Jack gets invited to dinner. And in this scene, he's coming from the below of the ship, right? The third passenger, third space. So when he gets there, he's got his nice suit on and whatnot. And they sort of said, "What does tomorrow bring?" He says, "Well, I could be doing this or I could be doing that." And here I am today with you fine folks in first class cabins. And I feel like that here in the Banff Springs Hotel, because I grew up in a small town. We weren't wealthy, and it's nothing to do about money regardless. It was just ambition, and then, rising through the ranks to some degree. And, I don't know where I'll be next week. And I don't really remember what happened last week, but here I am in the moment with yourself. And I've got, we mentioned earlier today, Gene Douglas Cardinal, here. And I'm speaking with, and I don't, it's hard to hear this for yourself right now, but with legends. And speaking with legends of architecture, and I feel so privileged to do so.
Well, I learned a lot just now. You balance, like talking about those two kinds of businesses, because, and I'm going to relate this to your question about, where do I think I want to be 10 years from now? Less on the I part, but more on the I was one of those businesses that's hard. Like you and your wife, it didn't exist before. It was built from scratch. And this opportunity at the Banff Sessions to kind of talk about its origin story, but also not rely on old successes, but show the work that's happening now, and does kind of, it is a huge honor to be able to talk about the thing that you've been part of creating.
Of course.
And so, but at the same time, I'm really jealous of all of those wonderful firms that they evolved from, an Art Gensler until Gensler, like all of these firms that were able to transform
Of course, yeah.
into other things that are relevant for their time, and also bluntly support people in their lives, allow their kids to do well, allow themselves to have a decent living, the
Retirement
basics,
savings, kids
retirement
saving plans,
savings,
education,
healthcare,
of
all
course,
that.
yeah.
So, life is a mix of those things. The kind of being happy when your business is in the black,
Yeah.
and at the same time being ambitious for what you can do to make everyone else's lives better.
Well, and I feel like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the bottom is just really the food, shelter. You've got love along the way, and then self-actualization at the top. And so when you start to feel like you get to that point, you're taking care of other people as well. I've felt like I'm not quite at this self-actualization point. I feel like I'm still somewhere in between here. But do you feel the pressure still of a firm of taking care of so many people? And do you feel like there's a split or a divide of the business aspect of it versus the design of what you're trying to actually accomplish and get out into the world?
I think what the huge opportunity is kind of recognizing there's all these different business models, just like there's all these different kinds of buildings and all these different kinds of cities. And so right now, think what's important is to learn from a lot of those models and figure out how does it fit the model that WXY is trying to create, which doesn't fit into the for-profit or not-for-profit buckets that well. And I heard this a lot today. How does housing fit in profit making? Like, how does, doing a certain kind of work fit when there's not the market for it yet or the profit? And that's really kind of why design is and planning are amazing fields to be doing right now at this moment, because a lot of what we all relied on to keep things going, whether it was natural resources, just take them out of the ground, you don't have to, or assuming that people could just keep being educated here and then leave. And you know what? Every person is of such huge value. And I think we will find that more and more as AI tools become that, you know, a human being, never mind a planet, is a terrible thing to waste. And so I think there's just a huge pressure on all of us to not give up on making things better.
Yes. Oh, and we've seen. I read the book *Sapiens*, and
I did too.
right. So it's a great book, and when they talk about art, sculpting, just that huge phase. It's like when more technology becomes um, widely adopted, and then you've got, we'll just say, robots doing your dishes. It frees your time up to do other things. And so I love that book, by the way.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
It also it's a bit of a scary spot, I suppose. But we've went through a tremendous amount of change over time. If we look at banking as an industry, I was on the board of some larger financial institutions, kind of in the multi-billion-dollar range, and if we still did the books off of old ledgers, then we've never accomplished what we're doing today. So everything becomes a bit more automated and things change. And I think that's going to happen with a lot of different industries, but humans are at the core, at the center of all of those. And so I hope that our time gets freed up to do more important things, or the things that we truly love and are passionate about. Do you feel like AI might take you in that direction at some point?
The thing I worry most about is, and I think it got talked about earlier yesterday, maybe, the power of making mistakes. Think that you actually learn more from your mistakes than your successes. When you win something, you rarely understand why you won it. Or when something works out really well, you don't have to do those hard questions. And I really worry that we will ascribe our mistakes to artificial intelligence instead of continuing to be human by learning from our mistakes. And that's my biggest fear about AI,
Okay.
not about the power of it.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. I'm very, somewhat perplexed as where it's going from a design standpoint, because we're a architectural signage and wayfinding firm. So we do design and build, and then we get a lot of government work and contracts like that, of course. And there's a lot of private and relationship driven relationships out there. But those days of, like, we do not submit a bid, for instance, and it says, submit 4 designs with your bid. It's like, no, design is the work. Like that, we're not going to give that part away for free. But what we are seeing is renderings being like submitted by companies consistently without the thought behind it, which is, what was the intended purpose of this, and its constructability and those kind of things. So I worry about that sort of maybe a cheap and fast alternative to some degree that's taken through AI that rips out the purpose. And when I'm trying to build something, I know it sounds silly to some degree, but I love the neon sign museum, one in Las Vegas, and we have one in Edmonton. And I was part of that as the president of the Alberta Sign Association. And I think about the products that we're trying to make today, and I think about when it comes down, at whatever point, will someone try to save it? So will someone try to keep it forever because they love it?
Well, that's a core thought, which is, how do you make something that people care about enough, if not save, then reuse.
Yes.
And how do you make things in a way that promotes that? But I think the industry related to science and wayfinding and placemaking is all connected, which is if people are forced into a position that they don't have to make places, they don't have to interact with other people, they don't need to go to hotels. They can't afford to go to hotels. They don't need to go to restaurants. They can't afford to go to restaurants. They have limited they're limited because most of what's really offered to them is online or not in virtual space.
Yeah. Or even delivery services, which I had a conversation about, like DoorDash and
Yeah.
Skip the Dishes and these kind of things, because it takes away from the, the dining experience and what you would come to there to do to enjoy the food, not just get it into a plastic container that you open up and then sort of toss away or recycle. But, there's a lot lost in that.
There's so much gained now when people who of all abilities, and especially if you're disabled, you can now have an equal stature of work if everyone's virtual.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're blind, there's all these apps on your phone that make it much more possible to navigate. But at the same time, we will all lose if human beings don't see their places and spaces, their built environment as even needing wayfinding. Like, and the problem I think won't be with the industry. The problem will be the reasons for its existence that are behind the industry.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
what's really behind wayfinding is the assumption that people want to walk around and experience a place.
That's right.
They have a reason to
Exploration.
go there. But if we don't support reasons for people to go places, then that's what I really worry about.
That's a great point. I love that. I think about the walkability score. It's not because you know where everything is. It's because you want to discover something you've never experienced and you don't know. The flora, the fauna, walking through parks and trails, learning about these things. And you also don't just want to be able to always find it on your phone on an app. You just want to be able to, like, in the moment, leave that thing in your pocket,
I'm kind
experience
of
it.
anti-efficiency in this. I'm for efficiency of kind of getting things built, let's say, and not wasting material. So that kind of efficiency. Let's not waste precious resources. But I think efficiency is overrated. The kinds of social interactions you have with people are not efficient. If anything, we should be designing buildings that encourage stopping and creating more time. So I think that we have to resist a world that does not value human interaction.
Ooh, you said something there about sort of like creating dwell time or congregation. And I can't remember the exact words that you used, but you said the Department of Transportation was largely for a long period of time the Department of Cars. It was like, how do you pass through this street just as fast and efficient as possible, but gave no thought to the cyclists and the pedestrians, which of course is what makes a community and a neighborhood worth visiting. And tell me a bit about that. That was such a powerful little statement you made.
Well, I think Times Square is a great example of that. Times Square, before it was full of cars, was full of horse buggies, smaller buildings. Times Square is a big bow tie. And pretty much all of those cars were squeezing pedestrians into tiny bits of sidewalk.
Yeah.
It turned out the stores weren't doing very well. The buildings, you had to give them really preferential rents to get people to move down. This is well as Times Square is getting cleaned up. And it kind of, there was a small group of people, some of them very influential in kind of this public space movement, who are like, we have to treat this like the great piazza of New
Yeah.
York.
They have a bench
Building to
where people can
building.
sit almost at a
Yes.
stadium. I've sat there myself
Okay.
and
So this is before that. And so creating a kind of common cause to see Times Square as a place for people, not a place for cars. People were like, well, I'm not going to be able to rent my retail space if I can't be dropped off right in front of it. Classic. Well, making all of those spaces for pedestrians and doing the shuffle so that there's just one row of cars through, and there's a bike path, and there's just scads of pedestrian space, and there's raised crosswalks. So all of that work, and these cool benches you can sit on, all of that work resulted in all of that retail spaces basically being rented for the highest prices in New York, and some of the highest prices for retail in the
And
world.
it also cascades outwards because the streets obviously start to push out wider, which benefits everybody around. I'm a property owner. I've got a dozen commercial and residential properties, and I have one specific commercial property that's on a main artery. And then also I own on the back street behind it, another one, which is almost, 25% less its value because it doesn't attract as high of rent and whatnot. And I have no parking, virtually zero on this front one, which I have some parking in the back. But at one point, I really liked the idea of the community was talking about creating one-way streets, which then that starts to, people are like, oh, that's inconvenient because now you're pushing people this way and that way. But if you think about the robustness of downtown Calgary, which it did one-way streets, it really creates a robust area that is a lot more coverage than these, straight arteries.
And obviously, the density of what's happening has a big effect on
The
it.
density, exactly. Yeah.
So, but density doesn't, it's something that you can actually create. You can't just accept that, oh, no one's walking on that street. In fact, if you do all the right things, more people want places to walk.
That's the important of the design.
That's the important part about the design. It's also really important to recognize that if I'm on my bicycle, it's much easier for me to stop for an ice cream or to pick up a book than if I'm driving by in a car. In fact, a lot of retail owners, it never occurs to them that actually if they could gather with the other people along the street and make sure that cyclists and walkers were going by all the time, that their business would be much better.
Of course, and because you don't just stop on your bicycle in one location, you are going to visit more of them along the way. I wish I could talk to you forever about all of this, of course, but I'm going to ask any favorite motto or catchphrase or something that sticks out of the quote that lives with you forever that you'll never forget.
Well, I'm not very good at memorizing things. I need to be better. So it tends to be aphorisms. But one of the ones that is just always stuck with me is waste not, want not.
Waste not, want not.
And I still feel like maybe that's an Alberta thing. Maybe it's how I grew up, in a province where there was a lot of need. It was not seen that, it just had acquired a have province status that, my parents and grandparents were definitely in a have not mentality. That waste not, want not is just still sticks with me as a
That's beautiful.
motivator.
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you very much for spending the time today. I am so thankful to have an opportunity to speak with you. Sometime when I visit New York, I'd love to look you up and go for a coffee on.
Oh, you have to. Plus, we're right across from the Woolworth building.
Oh,
so
well,
you need to visit.
My
Okay.
wife's going to be over the moon. I also have to tell you that through all of this in the planning, my wife is the backbone of my business and ours together. We've been married for 20 years. We'll celebrate our 20-year anniversary this August. And so she sees everything that I'm doing, and I'm preparing for some of these talks. And I had your YouTube videos up doing my research, and she's like, oh my God, Claire, I would love the work that she's doing. She's so inspirational. And so if there's ever a chance that you could meet her, and I hope it would be on your turf in New York, we would love to do that.
Oh, you guys have to come meet us in New York. And I'm really inspired the fact that you and your wife have this business together and are really excited about working together. Not everyone knows, but Mark Yo's, my husband, is the Y in WXY.
Yeah, and I didn't know that before you mentioned it.
And, we're both fiercely independent and dependent people. And he is so talented and really so open-minded when it comes to design ideas. And I love that.
Well, I look forward to hopefully meeting him. And again, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really fun.